Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Ariana Aboué, a British Afghani journalist and the founder of Ariana magazine. Ariana has also organised and participated in various events in London to showcase Afghan culture, from the Colours of Eid event in Luton to the Eid in the Square event as part of Cultural Style Week, amongst various other events. Additionally, she actively promotes Afghan businesses and various other Muslim businesses on her social media platforms. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, Ariana.
Walaikum assalam, Sakina. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I'm really glad to be part of this show, especially regarding the topic we are going to discuss.
In your opinion, what are the most pressing issues, that are affecting Afghans today due to the world's apparent neglect? Do you think there are specific areas such as education, women's rights, or healthcare that you believe require immediate action, immediate attention from the international community? What would you say to that?
Definitely, there's so many issues, so it's quite hard to group or pinpoint which ones to talk about. But currently, Afghanistan faces increased poverty. It's always had poverty, but more so increased because of the widespread unemployment, international sanctions, and frozen humanitarian aid by the US. And it's been over 40 years since Afghanistan has faced war, so you could see the impact of the war present in the country still. Women's and girls' rights are the fundamental to any society and country, and they are the backbone of our society. These rights, which have been severely abused by the Taliban, urgently needs to be addressed and resolved as soon as possible. While there is less theft and robbery, where people have told me about living in Afghanistan, largely due to the fear of the Taliban and what they would do. Despite promises from the Taliban that they would reopen schools, the Taliban's 3-year delay has hindered many from graduating. So poverty, women's rights, and then also the Hazara community, as I mentioned, which have been systematically targeted because of the Shia sect. They have experienced recent attacks by reports indicate that it was done by a different group, but it was in an area in Kabul which mainly had Hazara people. So this highlights another issue in the country, that racism is still there, and targeted attacks on minority groups still continue to be a serious issue in the country. In addition to this, for example, the Taliban have removed religious group books from minority groups, like I mentioned, such as, for example, called Shia Jafari jurisprudence book. So they have banned that from schools and banned that from entering the country. The various groups in Afghanistan have historically lived together like neighbors, friends, families in harmony. However, such bans create hostility and disrupt the peaceful coexistence amongst Afghans. So there's lots of issues, but for example, poverty, women's rights, the Hazara community, issues amongst them, and other minority groups are some of the current issues ongoing in the country. There's many others, but those are some of the major ones.
Now, that sounds absolutely amazing, because as we know, just looking back to the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, we had Jews, we had Muslims living side by side. So It's very surprising and interesting how the Taliban are able to justify doing what they do. I don't know what you can say to that, because you're not them, but it's just interesting how they can enforce this. But looking forward, what actions do you think the global community should take to support Afghanistan? Realistically, what do you think they should do?
So the international community needs to step up with charitable support for Afghanistan, because they have faced over 40 years of conflict, from the Anglo-Afghan Wars, the Civil War in 1978, the Soviet invasion in 1979, to the NATO intervention from 2001 to 2021. The country has faced significant turmoil. So this prolonged conflict has led to, for example, when the NATO forces were in the country. There was lots of war crimes committed, widespread theft and robbery, rising disability rates, loss of innocent lives, mistreatment of Afghan women and girls, many orphan children, and poverty. So the result of such wars, there should be a solution for that. So currently, if you go to Afghanistan, of course, you would visibly see the significant impact of the result of war. So the international community needs to step up with their charitable support. They need to help the less fortunate in Afghanistan, those who have been affected by the war. So they need to be attended to, firstly, because that is the result of war. And who has done that? That has been the international community. So that needs to be a priority. And then, for example, the gender apartheid must be recognized as a crime under international law in order to strengthen efforts to combat the human rights abuses towards women in the country, support towards refugees, particularly those who have fled persecution from Afghanistan or neighboring countries such as under the Iranian regime or the Pakistani government, where there is mistreatment towards Afghan refugees for a prolonged time in their systems. And the international community needs to, instead of criminalizing such refugees, as we can see in the past in the news recently, we saw refugees have been targeted, people of color have been targeted, those who are Muslims have been targeted. So we need to, instead of criminalizing refugees, we need to hear their stories and instead welcome them and support them, because they have fled such turmoil and they're trying to live a better future and aid the country they're currently going to live in as well. And also the international community can engage diplomatically in terms of not interfering or coming back to the country of Afghanistan. They should communicate with the Taliban who are currently in the country and put pressure on them to improve women's rights, whether that is through sanctions, for example, or, criminalizing the gender apartheid under international law. Foreign nations should refrain from directly involving military intervention, because we saw the result of that. There was no good end to that. And instead, they should use economic sanctions or, diplomatic pressure to put pressure on the Taliban to restore women's rights as soon as possible, so they are able to go back to school and gain their higher education, for example. And also supporting education. In the meantime, if they're not able to put pressure for whatever reason, or not able to convince the Taliban to, restore women's rights immediately, in terms of education, the international community could fund educational programs, including online schools for girls, until restrictions are lifted and educational opportunities are fully restored for women and girls in the country. They could also support local businesses, encourage and assist Afghan businesses both in the UK and within Afghanistan to foster economic development and self-sufficiency. So these are some of the ways whereby the international community could help the people of Afghanistan. Ultimately, we need an Afghanistan where all citizens, regardless of their ethnicity and religious beliefs, can live peacefully side by side, and where both men and women have access to basic human rights, including work, education, so we can rebuild our country ourselves, because no one else can do it. If we exclude or attack one group in relation to another, we won't be able to rapidly progress as a country. We need a country to build on peace and unity, not on fear, violence, and human rights abuses.
MashaAllah, that's so well said.